Excellent. Oh, hi, Emily. How are you?
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having
It,
me.
it's super fantastic. I'm super pumped to have you here today to talk about all manner of exciting sales leadership stuff. I mean, I feel that like it was just yesterday that I met you when you were a sales manager at Trip Actions, and now look like you got multiple managers under you. You're selling BI. We're not selling travel anymore. It's like pretty exciting stuff. As we kind of get folks kind of like trickling in here, Emily, you got any big plans for this weekend coming up here?
I do, yes. We have a wedding in the Napa area. So I'm a new mom. So it'll be the first time we're leaving the baby at home with grandma.
That's exciting. Excellent. Well, this is what this is what FaceTime is for, is what I've learned. Like I never really like had a use case for FaceTime before I had a kid. And then now like our 5-year-old loves the FaceTime with his grandparents all the time. So it's like very useful, although it'll crush your battery. Awesome. Well, hey everyone, thank you for joining us for Power Hour. I'm Pete Kazanji. As people are joining here, want to make sure that people are familiar with the Zoom kind of webinar interface here. The big idea here with Power Hour is because we have a wonderful, illustrious guest here. The idea here is for you to be able to pick the brain of Emily, myself, on like whatever specific topic might be top of mind for you. We had a bunch of great questions that were delivered ahead of time, so we're going to kind of get into some of those as well. But use the chat panel, use the Q&A, etc., and and we'll do our best to answer any of those questions. For folks who are not familiar with Power Hour, Power Hour is hosted by modern sales pros. MSP is the world's largest revenue leadership community for those in sales management, sales and revenue operations, sales development, and related disciplines. And the community's mission is pretty straightforward. It's to create an environment for our 27,000 and growing members to answer the questions that they might struggle to solve on their own, help them see around corners. And so we do that through great live sessions like what you're about to participate in today. We have a robust online forum, in-person events, and for those who weren't previously admitted, you should now have access to the community. Before we get started, Power Hour is a unique format. We're not going to be going through a specific piece of content. Instead, we're going to be picking the brain of whatever revenue leader we have today, in this case, Emily. And so you're here to learn, use the Q&A, ask questions, use the comments, etc. So with all that, let's do some introductions here. I can go really quick. My name is Pete Kazanji. I'm the founder of Atrium. Atrium makes data-driven sales management software that helps sales managers, sales leaders, etc., use data and metrics to improve the performance of their teams. I'm also the founder of Modern Sales Pros and have been doing sales leadership for around 15 years now. Actually, no, not 12 years now. So that's a little bit about me. But more importantly, we've got Emily here today. She's the AVP of Commercial Sales at Heap. But I would love, Emily, for you to kind of like take everyone through your how you got to where you're at right now, kind of like give people your journey, so to speak, starting all the way back at Nordstrom, because I'm a big fan of Nordstrom Alumni. So maybe you can kind of take people through the different sales organizations that you've worked at and kind of the roles that you've had, just so they kind of understand what they can potentially ask questions about.
Absolutely. So yes, I have a pretty non-traditional background. I started my career at Nordstrom as a salesperson, worked my way up into managing quite a few locations in the Bay Area. From Nordstrom, I actually did a small stint in recruiting and realized really quickly that products was what I wanted to sell. So moved into High Five. That's where I had my first journey as an SDR, and then moved into an account executive role there. From High Five, I moved to Trip Actions as a mid-market AE. I did that for about a year, and that's when I moved back up into leadership in the tech world and ran a commercial sales team there. And then at Heap, I did join Heap as a commercial sales manager for the past year and a half, and just recently was promoted to be the AVP of commercial sales for North America.
Oh, super exciting. And like totally different sales motion, totally different buyer than Trip Actions. So I'm excited to talk a little bit more about that. So we can kind of get started here. So I think one thing, especially with like a lot of the kind of like disruption that COVID caused for folks. A lot of people kind of like changing careers, kind of moving and like being like having more opportunities made available to them via like remote work and what have you. Maybe you can kind of talk a little bit about how you like what inspired you to like move out of non-tech into tech, and then also how like the things that you did prior at Nordstrom set you up for success in kind of like in tech land.
Yeah, so to answer the first part of your question, a non-tech role, I grew up in a small town, Northern California, so I didn't really know anything about the tech bubble until Nordstrom brought me to the Bay Area. So once I got to the Bay Area, I started meeting people who were telling me they worked in tech. So I figured out pretty quickly that I wanted to leave the retail space to get into tech. So I eventually did make the jump first into recruiting. That, like I said, didn't last super long until I actually landed at High Five as an SDR. Repeat the second question or the second part of the question.
Well, just like, I mean, so one of the things at Nordstrom is, so what one thing that people may not be familiar with is that like Nordstrom has an amazing sales culture. It's bananas, right? And so someone like people who don't realize that might look at somebody coming out of a place like Nordstrom or whatever and be like, oh, okay, this like person may not be a fit for this SDR role or an AE role or what have you. But like you'd be so wrong. You'd be insanely wrong. And so like maybe you can talk about like Nordstrom, and because like we have a bunch of career switches at Atrium, I'll share about, but maybe you can kind of share how some of the stuff that you worked on there really set you up for success later on.
Yes. So yes to all of that. It's a pretty rigorous program they put you through. So just as a salesperson in general, you either make commission or you make minimum wage. So they set you up from just like this, the pay that if you are successful at Nordstrom, you have to figure out how to sell, frankly. So you have to learn and understand the store. You're essential to like one location, but you can sell outside of that department. So if you sell someone an outfit, you could sell them shoes, so to speak.
Really?
Yeah. So you have to know everything about the products. Number one. Number two, you have to be super quick. You have to understand what's the customer's why. Why are they here? What do they need? What's the need? And then what can you upsell them on to really round out the outfit, so to speak. So it really puts you on your toes to not just say hi to the customer, but we called it smiling in the aisle, and really engage with the customers and understand why they're here. What is their pain? Like, I am going to a
discovery.
wedding. So it's a lot smaller scale or a different scale, you could call it, but it's the foundational building blocks of what could potentially be a really strong SDR or account executive one day.
Well, I mean, it's selling behavior though, right? Like it's disco, because if you think, especially, I think one of the things that that folks don't realize is like you're having these like micro transactions where like somebody walks into the aisle, it's top of funnel, right? You got to pattern interrupt them, right? Right. Like, but in a non-annoying way.
You have to identify the pain.
You want to pivot to discovery.
Yep.
Right. Like, what brings you here today? And it's not just discovery and like there's like baby discovery, which is like asking questions that to just get information out of your brain into my brain. And then there's like provocative discovery, where you're asking questions that are like where the intention is to make something click in their brain. Like, oh, I didn't realize that I had that unmet need. But your provocative question has now illuminated that to me. And then pivoting that into matching that to the solutions that are on the shelf, so to speak. And I didn't even think about like the cross-selling thing, because like it's hard enough when you've got a single product to like know. And I would imagine, I don't know, like maybe you work in the shoe department or you work in the accessory department or whatever, but now it's actually like a whole solution. It's like, oh, someone's coming in looking for a purse or whatever, but they should be thinking about the fact that like they should have other accessories that are tied to that. And then, by the way, what's the particular point of like, what's the particular catalyst for this person? Oh, I'm going to this wedding. Oh, are you? Let's talk about what else we're going to wear at the wedding. Right? Like, I think that's actually a really like important behavior that most like SaaS sellers, especially like junior SaaS sellers, like don't do a good job of. What were some of the ways that you would let's talk about the discovery piece of that. Like, what were the mechanisms that you would use to like get the information out of the person and also like reveal to them other things that maybe they hadn't thought about?
I think it starts with building rapport, right? You have to start from the get-go
Totally.
and just build rapport, get the trust of the customer from the
Yep.
get-go. And then you have to be conversational. You have to be a real person and you can't attack them. I mean, it's more of a personal use case here, right? So you can't attack them or else they're probably not going to share
Same
details.
in B2B.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, you just have to get personal with them, get real and uncover, hey, what's actually going on in their life? What are other areas that we can help them with? And then you got to know the product, the different like services, different areas that you could actually speak to sell.
Yeah, one of the things that I've been doing recently is as like a personal challenge to myself. I call it turbo rapport.
Okay.
Yeah,
Turbo rapport.
turbo rapport. So as a personal challenge, what I'll do is and hopefully I haven't talked about this on Power Hour before, but like I'll bring like in environments where like you know that the other person you're going to be interacting with is like probably like shields up to start. And like we have these environments all the time. Like my favorite example is like flight attendants on planes. I'm like, my goal is by the end of this flight to be their favorite person, like their favorite passenger. And so like, and because then if you think about that, like that's your intention, what you then do is you look at every like opportunity for interaction as an opportunity to like do that, like score, like put points on the board from a rapport building standpoint. And so obviously the very, very, very beginning of that is like the most important thing. Cause like later on they like, right, they look at you and they're like, oh, there was that nice guy from, 27A or whatever. And then like now you're just like deepening and deepening. But yeah, like I love to do that in what are other examples? So I live in San Francisco. So and I look like a total like tech dude or whatever. So you go into like a pretty hip bar or whatever, and like they're maybe like, well, I don't know about you, your Patagonia jacket. I'm like, that's okay, we're gonna be friends, right? And like how quickly can you do that? And I think this is like super, like I tell my reps this all the time, this is super applicable during sales calls as well, because like that the first 5 minutes, or not even 5 minutes, like the first 3 minutes is like whether or not they're going to be honest with you in disco is predicated on whether or not like they think you're cool and they think you're chill. And the mechanism by which to do that, of course, is to like to do turbo rapport and be like, oh, like, did we just become best friends? We did. And the way to do that, of course, is to like just be really good at picking things out. Like Emily and I hopped on the call earlier to kind of prep, and I was like, Ellie, your glasses are amazing, right? And Emily and I have known each other for forever, but like you got to start with things like that. And then one of the things that I tell my reps to do all the time, this is literally in our pre-call planning checklist, is what's the thing that you're going to go into the call with like what's plan A and plan B on ice break? Because if you show up and you talk about the weather, oh my God, I can't help you, dude.
Oh, I can't. No, it's for me too. We have a big thing going on right now.
Cannot.
Yeah. The weather. Nobody wants to talk about the weather.
No. Yeah. What were you saying your big thing is right now?
Our big thing is back to the basics right now across Heap. So just thinking about the economic climate right now, these are good times, right? To just get back to the basics and understand, hey, these are the things that I do in my day-to-day. What's my operating rhythm? Where can I improve, right? My PG strategy, PG meaning pipeline generation for those that don't know, we're a big outbound house at Heap. How can I improve on that? My discovery, where can I get better? And that goes down to exactly, you just nailed it, like pre-call planning. We don't talk about the weather. We pulled up a LinkedIn yesterday. This guy had a Spotify and he had an actual spot. Yeah. So it's like, you should come unmute immediately and say, hey, I watched on your blog, you have a couple of like Spotify podcasts. How cool, right? It immediately just disarms the room and they inherently are going to be more interested in talking to you and want to trust you, to your point, so you can actually get real discovery to understand, hey, this is a real opportunity, or I need to qualify this out.
Yeah, totally. And then I think the other thing at Nordstrom that people don't really realize is just like how data-driven the sales culture was as well. And partially it's because it was all like commission based, but like it's my understanding. So my aunt, I don't know if Brass Plum exists anymore. You would know if it does. Oh, it does. Okay. My aunt back in my aunt managed Brass Plum back in the day, and then she eventually went on to sell frames to optometrists, and she and like it was just like clockwork, right? Like it would, and this was like in the 90s too, or like maybe the 80s and the 90s. So I imagine the computer systems were like atrocious back then. Maybe they're not all that much better now, but like, it's my understanding it's very data driven. Like everybody kind of knows where they're at, who's like the leaderboard and like who's on the bubble, etc. Is that fair?
100%. And you have a dashboard as a manager. So when I manage the women's clothing department,
Yep.
I would move like the coats to the front of the aisle, let's say, because I knew a storm was coming. And then across the whole company, I would have like 100% increase on my coats across the company. So it would be really strategic. And then you would have data that would back each of your, because you had a full department that you own, but you had micro departments. Like you had coats, you had women's tops, you had jeans. And so the things that you did in the programs that you would run with your AEs behind the scenes essentially would drive data to show revenue that, hey, I had a huge increase in women's coats. So corporate, next time this year, send me doubled women's coats because I just 100x what I did last year.
Yeah, that's crazy. And I think what's funny about that is that's like marketing sales alignment. And you might be like, wait, how is that marketing sales alignment? Well, like there was a campaign that happened. It happened to be called a rainstorm or whatever, but like that's actually really important, right? Like, hey, we're going to do a campaign. Like I'll give you an example at Atrium. We have like a bunch of different like programs that we do. And one of the programs that we do with sale is like we offer to sales, because like it takes like 3 minutes to set up an Atrium instance. You just like turn it on by Salesforce connecting, like OAuth connecting your Salesforce instance. So like as a sales leader, you can just show up and like turn on an Atrium account. And then Atrium will show you like how where you're probably going to land that quarter. And then like, which is obviously is like very top of mind for a sales leader. And then of course, like then we kind of get into the other things that Atrium is really like helpful for around like, okay, what's going on with your different reps and like where their improvement areas or whatever. But if like a lead comes in and it's here for this program, the AE has to have the situational awareness to say, okay, I'm entering, this conversation with this point, like this person came in because they came in from the ramping program, right? Because an SDR used like use the trigger-based outbound to say, hey, Emily, I saw that you just hired 4 account executives. Congratulations, that's really awesome. Actually, could we offer you a copy of 5 Secrets of the Sales Coach? We find it's really fantastic for, managers who have new people that are onboarding. Actually, on the topic, blah, 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 Atrium can help you measure your ramping. So if the AE, and if the person's like, yeah, that sounds great, I'll take that meeting, the AE's got to know this person's showing up and they care about like ramping versus this person's showing up and they're caring about, a pipeline hygiene use case or whatever. Right. And so in this case, it's like what you were doing is, hey, it's going to rain. In fact, let's like move the coats up front. And then I would imagine you probably were like doing some enablement with your staff as well. Is that fair?
Correct. Yeah. So I'd run campaigns just like we do with account executives today, or PG plays, so to speak, of different ways to sell.
How, and like, so like, what would be an example? Like what was that just like in the morning? We're like, hey, okay, it's going to rain. Let's like everyone get on the front foot with respect to coats or whatever. Like how would you guys do that? Would you do like, prepare with the top tracks, or what was the deal?
It was so long ago. So the one that comes to mind is we did a BLT, so a bottom layer top. So the first person to sell 10 BLTs would win a Saturday off. And we're talking like college kids, so they care about Saturdays off, right? So I figured out their why, like, why are you motivated to work here? What do they care about? Saturdays off, right? So you guys sell 10 BLTs and you get a Saturday off. So that's just an example.
Oh, dude, I love that. Really? And especially what I love about that is because I've been on this jag recently about how management is sales. And what you just said right there is like, I figured out their why.
Yeah.
They want to, go to Golden Gate Park or whatever. Like Outside Lands is this Saturday. Like they really want the Saturday off. So now they're like motivated, right? Cool. What would be the positive benefits of like being able to go to Outside Lands? Well, I'd be able to go with my friends, and like, there might be some cute boys or girls there that like I might be into. Oh, okay. Like what would be the negative implications of like not being able to go to Outside Lands? Oh man, I'll get roasted on the group chat. Yeah, okay, cool. I totally hear you. So like here's our plan to success. Let's talk about future state about how you're going to sell some BLTs, right?
Right. Exactly.
I love it. Well, so anyway, I've always been obsessed with Nordstrom Nordy's alumni because of all the things that you're describing right there. It's just like a very operationally like rigorous culture, and I think that that's the case. Like, there's not every career switching situation is like that, but like if you can find the patterns as a sales leader, like I'll give you an example. Former Yelp sellers, like a lot of people look down on media sellers or like SMB sellers. Former Yelp sellers are like nails. Yeah, hustle. Like you'll have some kids that are in there who are like, maybe they're just kind of there to like, mail it in and what have you. But then like if you can find the ones who are like bright and have hustle, and so usually the signifier there, and I'm just describing one of our sales managers right now is a dude named Sean Cardini. He's absolutely fantastic. But like the sellers who then became like sales managers at Yelp, now And so what's interesting though is that like those sales managers at Yelp or Yext or or Demand Force or whatever, like the people who like matriculated to sales management, I guess it's kind of like Nordstrom's in this regard. That like those ones got filtered out, filtered up, and then like those folks can pivot into SaaS selling in a really excellent way. So like if you can find these patterns as a sales leader, then like you can steal a march on other people. So like rather than being like, oh, I guess I'm gonna go hire some seller from. So I'm going to go hire some seller from Heap, right? Or I'm going to pay through the nose because someone's already done the filtering for you. If you can go shopping for like the diamonds in the rough, you'll be like, pretty super pumped. Are there other places where you've found kind of like profiles like that you've been excited about?
One of my top reps right now he was selling Uber Eats. So he was calling
there you go.
restaurants, and he super interesting background, but absolutely crushed our challenger interview. And he is extremely successful. So I just try to keep an open mind, and I encourage my leaders to not just look for the people who have the college background, because to your point, there are diamonds in the rough.
Well, tell me, because I know that you're really passionate about like good interviewing, and you mentioned the challenger interview. Can you talk about that a little bit more and like how you guys approach that?
Absolutely. My passion just comes from I think a lot of people come to interviews and aren't prepared or don't have questions to ask the person and are very nervous. And I think when you approach a job interview, it definitely is a nervous situation. But for me personally, I've always looked at job interviews as you're not interviewing me, I'm interviewing you. We work more than we're at home, right? And so at the end of the day, the people that you work with, the company you join is going to change your life. So I'm really passionate about just setting the people up in my network, anyone who wants help or anyone that I mentor, just setting them up for success in terms of what does a job interview entail? What questions are you bringing? I have specific buckets that I think that you should bucket your questions in for job interviews. So from that perspective, I love helping people try and just nail their job interview. On the flip side of that, the other piece of your question is our challenger interview. So we have.
Yeah.
Oh, you want me to pause?
No. Please. I want to hear. I mean, it's called a challenger interview, so I'm like, all right, this sounds spicy.
It's 3 parts. It actually came from MongoDB, so it came from our sales leaders over there. So it's used heavily, I think, in the market now, but essentially has 3 parts. The first is a prospecting exercise. So we just give you 5 accounts to talk us through, and it's more just like, hey, how are we thinking about the accounts that you're going after, that you would prospect into? And then it's a prospecting outreach. So what would your email look like to them? Is it 5 scrolls on my phone? Is it really pointed? Right? Is it to our point earlier, right? Is it specific to the person that we're talking to? Like, could you find that they had a podcast on Spotify, right? Is it something personal to them? And then the last part is they do a small heat pitch. And we set them up for success. So I actually meet with the reps, a sales leader will meet with the interviewee the week before, and we give them a deck and we say, hey, ask me any questions. And like, how can I set you up for success for this interview? So we're actually heavily involved in the background, making sure the interviewees are set up for success for their interview. So we've seen so much success in it, and we've gotten a lot of really good feedback too.
Yeah, I love it. That's so funny that like So our interview process is like pretty similar. Like I'm actually going to drop into the chat here a link to our SDR take home prospecting interview, which essentially is like what we tell them to do is like, hey, go to our website, read the website, figure out what our value proposition is, right? Then go like, here's a great account. Like, so in this case, it's like Sendoso. They're one of our customers. Like, hey, this is like a sick account for us, right? Go ahead and look at them, right? And now go find 5 other accounts that are as sick as these guys.
Yep.
Right. And then we say, great, that's account identification. And then we say, cool, here are the human personas that we care about. Take Sendoso, Lever, Templify, I mean, fill in the blank, right? Like you can imagine this with Heap. It's like, here's Spotify, identify the human personas within here, like on LinkedIn that you should sell to, and then why, right? And then write the thing. So we do that because I'm a big fan of what's known as job simulation, which is kind of what we're describing, where don't tell me what you're going to do, or like tell me what about you, like show me, right? Like do the push-ups, right? Like show me that you can actually do it. Don't tell me about how many like bench press you can do, like show me how many you can put up. And then the second piece, and so like in sales, we're communicators, right? So it's like, show me that you can type and like put good sentences together without typos. And then like, show me that you can do this research, show me that you can follow a playbook. And then what we do, we have a mock, we actually do it a little bit different. I don't have them sell Atrium to me. What I do is I have them sell their solution. And so we do a mock disco and demo. And so what I do is I say, hey, Emily, I'm going to be whoever you tell me to be. I want you to set yourself up as best as you can. Like make me a sick op for you, right? And so what that does is that makes them have to they have to know what makes a sick op for them. And you're going to give me all the information I need to be a good discovery partner for you. And so the people who like knock it out of the park are like, cool, here's your current state. Here's your pain points. Here's the compelling event, all these sort of things. And like what they do is they just, because I tell them this, I'm like, just pretend like in volleyball, like pretend you're setting yourself for the craziest spike ever. And then other people are like, here's a couple of things. And you're just like, oh, bro. Oh, you did not. And then already just from that level of preparation, you could totally see the difference between people who are like,
it's fascinating,
really got it going on versus people who are just like mailing it in. And the funny thing is, like, if you just talk to them, like you kind of have a hard time. And then we go into the actual like mock disco themselves. And that's like more behavioral. It's like, hey, Emily, super great to see you. Oh my gosh, those glasses are so cute. Are those new? Oh no, they're not. I just, got rid of my contacts. Oh, wonderful. So, hey, we're still good until 11:45, right? Yeah, we are. Okay, wonderful. Well, here, I thought I'd set a little agenda for us here. Is that okay by you? Yeah. And anyway, you're just like looking at the behavior, so then you're actually looking at the behaviors, and then you actually see if what their disco questions look like, how good they are at presenting and demoing and things like that. And it's just kind of like an NFL, like a little baby NFL combine. And the information you get out of that is just it's unstoppable.
It is. And it's a show versus a tell, which I think is the biggest piece.
Yeah, totally. I want to answer or tackle John's question here because I thought it would be good. So John Russo has a question around saying, hey, let's say you're a mid-market company selling transactional, moving towards selling to the enterprise because the CEO or the board thinks it's more profitable. It's a different skill set selling to enterprise, as you both know. What can marketing do to enable enterprise selling motion that would help sales bridge a potential skills gap? I can take a first shot at this since I know that, but I think that TA has probably had some experience with this at Trip Actions, then maybe at Heap. One thing that I like to say, John, is that every new sales motion, whether you're going to a different segment or selling a substantially different use case, usually it kind of requires a figuring the whole thing out again. Not the whole thing, but a lot of the thing, because what's going to happen is the humans that you're going to be interacting with are going to be very different than the humans that you interacted with in the in your other down market segments. the current state is going to be a lot different, right? The buying process is going to be a lot different. Like, I'll give you guys an example. So Atrium's, like, historically, Atrium's sweet spot has been, an organization that has anywhere between like SDR plus AE is like greater than or equal to like 5 or 10, all the way up to like a couple hundred sellers. We're now starting to get above that, but the reason why, and like we crushed that first, like for that first use case, like the 10, 30, 50, 100 sellers or what have you. But in the like the much bigger organizations, typically historically, they're going to have they're going to have a pretty substantial legacy, BI implementations. Probably sounds familiar to Emily, like Tableau or Looker or whatever, and they're going to have a lot of people who are like employed to like feed and water that thing and keep it from breaking, and so on and so forth. And so what you have to do is you have to show up with a different message. You can't show up and say like, oh, by the way, this is just like way better and faster than your existing janky thing, because those people are not going to be receptive to that necessarily, right? And so like, one, you just have to recognize that it's going to be very different. To your specific question around like how marketing could potentially help with that, I think oftentimes what needs to happen is like even just the way that you talk about it ends up being different, right? So like for a down market organization, we might one of our account executives might show up to an organization and say like, okay, like what's your current state? How do you guys use data to instrument your team right now? Oh, like we barely have any dashboards or reporting in Salesforce. And then we certainly don't have anyone who's available to make them. Oh, okay, cool. Well, like let's just turn this into 5 minutes. We'll be done. For the larger organizations, it's more focused on interpretation. Like, oh, okay, cool. So you have all those like Looker and Tableau implementations. That's fantastic. If you need to ask a next question, how do you go about doing that right now? Well, I don't. I have to like file a JIRA ticket. It sucks, et cetera, et cetera. And then you have to talk to the other side of the data team side of the equation, the sales ops side of the equation. Hey, how underwater are you with all these like inbound tickets from these folks? And actually, like all the things that you guys create for these guys over here, do they actually consume it? No, they don't. We make these reports for them and they never look at them, and it drives me insane. And so like that's a very different, like that's an interpretation use case up here, which is different than like hey, we have nothing down here. So just like differentiating that and then making sure that there's like slides around that is something that the marketers can really help with. Emily, do you want to have anything you want to add around like, intricacies of like moving up market? I don't know if you had much of experience with that at TA or at Heap at all.
The only thing I think I call out, you hit it in the last sentence that you just mentioned, is I think your slide deck, like how you sell to an enterprise is very different than how you sell down market. So what is your value prop and who are the people that are going to surround you? It takes a village to close deals. Are you multi-threaded? In what areas are you multi-threaded? And what's your value prop for each department? Because as you go upstream, you've got to have that nailed. So I think just nailing the messaging with the marketing team there is just going to be the most impactful.
Yeah, totally. Per persona messaging, right? And it changes. In fact, actually, I have this slide. So at Atrium, the phrase that we call them tiers, like organizational tiers. So tier 1 means no sales ops. Tier 2 means a single sales operations person. So it's the point at which like an organization starts caring about, I mean, they care about it here, but now there's like a human who's responsible for helping with like, to using data to measure performance. And then tier 3 is where you start having multiple sales ops people. And then tier 4 is when you have like a much larger department. And so if you're a sales leader, the thing that matters to you in a tier 1 situation where you have like no sales ops support, you're like, oh yeah, I don't know how to do any of this stuff and it's a disaster. That's one message to that person. Like, oh yeah, here, just like give us 10 grand and we'll be on our merry way. You're like, your problem will be solved. Whereas if you're in a tier 3, it's more along the lines of like, oh, you have a sales operations partner, but they don't provide the level of like interpretation service that you might be most excited about. The sales operations person at a tier 3 organization, they might be a little like sensitive around something that like is showing up and potentially reducing like their kind of like kingdom, if you will. If you don't do a good job of characterizing to them, hey, you have way more important things to be doing than like trending out like charts for an SMB sales manager. Wouldn't you agree? What are your big priorities? Oh my God, if I don't get steel brick shipped in the next 6 months, they're going to fire me. Wonderful. Sounds like you need a lot of like time for that. And so like having that message broken out on a per persona basis, I think is extremely important. You can imagine this at like Nordstrom, right? Like it's like one thing if like one person comes in, but if it's like a husband and wife come in, or like a mom and a kid, and now you got like a multi-stakeholder sale there. Like the kid wants like the smoking shoes or whatever, and mom's like, I don't know about that. And like, so we got to like convince both of them. I know. Well, so one thing I wanted to ask about was, since I know that you had like Ruby is, she's 9 months old now. What has like really changed for you, and how, like, I mean, because you're a sales manager now, sales leader, right? You're responsible for, managers at this point. What have been the biggest changes there, and kind of like what are the biggest recommendations that you would have for folks who are approaching that?
Yeah, it's a big question. I think she's my first one. So at first, it was extremely scary. I had no clue how it impact my career. So I think my biggest advice is honestly, don't be scared as you go through it, whether you're a mom or a dad about to go through it. And I think you just have to lean on the people around you. So the leaders, both my VP and my CRO, were extremely supportive. They had me delete Slack. They only texted me questions about Ruby and not about work when I was on maternity leave. So we really set really clear expectations. And then when I came back, it was the same thing. Like, what's the expectation setting? I now have 2 full-time jobs. And so my VP was like, it's going to actually take you time to realize how to work those full-time jobs. And so now fast forward 8 months, I've got it down pretty good today, but it changes day by day. So I think it's, don't be afraid to raise your hand, ask for help, and set expectations with your team. So right now, I used to work 7. I'm an early morning person, so I would get on 7 a.m. I'd work until 6 or 7 at night, no problem. And now, while I can still do that, I was building a proposal last night with the gal on my team until 7 p.m. But she was FaceTiming me and I was feeding the baby. So, she was eating some spaghetti and I was building a proposal. So I think it's just setting expectations that after 5, you can call me and I'll help you. It just might not be a Zoom experience. So just be open and honest with your team.
What was Ruby's opinion about the discounting that was being offered? Did she
She was
sign off
okay
on it?
with it. Yeah,
Really?
she was agreeing to it. She was throwing spaghetti at one point, but we got through it.
Oh, she was like, no, 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 I don't like that. Here, go ahead and tier it like this. Ruby is deal desk. I like it. Um, that's fantastic. I think one thing as a dad that I've come to realize, and like, my son is 5, is that management is sales, and like management is not dissimilar to parenting. And what I mean by that is, because like I'm an early stage operator, and so the sort of things that are required in early stage operating, when like every day is like day to day to day, like day in day out, like you're just going from like near death experience, near death experience, near death experience, near death experience, organizationally, right?
Right.
Let's not pretend like let's not pretend let's not overstate the case here, but like the kind of leadership that oftentimes is deployed in that sort of situation is very command and control. Do this way, it needs to be done. I told you that once already, like I'm not going to tell you a third time, those sort of things. And that that level of urgency and crispness, like it can be powerful in an early stage environment. The problem though is that like humans are not machines, right? They're squishy. And even though like you might be managing a 24-year-old SDRs, or like 28-year-old AEs, or 32-year-old AEs, or what have you, and you might think that like they can follow directions like crisply and like read documentation and follow it. Humans are squishy, right? And this is like the way that I always, it's funny, whenever we talk like with Atrium, like Atrium is for using data to measure humans and like their behavior and like their execution. And so the funny thing is, like, sometimes sales operations people or data people will get like really spun up about the thing that like some metric will be off by like 2% or whatever. And it's like, yeah, that's because the person didn't log it in the CRM. Like, oh, well, like the data is inaccurate. It's like, look, these are humans that we're measuring. It's never going to be like precisely accurate because like they're like squishy human beings, the same way that like a sales organization is like a revenue factory, but it's not like machines, right? It's like it's assembly lines that are composed of like squishy human beings. And so now that I have this like 5-year-old, like you can't just like tell a 4-year-old like go do this thing, right? Because they're going to be like no, and they'll like throw things and whatever. And so instead, what you have to do is like elicit them and like lead them there. And I think that's like really applicable to sales management as well, even though you might not think that you could just be like go do this thing right here. And so I think that like being a parent has really like opened my eyes to that and made me a better manager in that regard. Like I'm still obviously like working on it substantially. I know that like people management and people leadership is really important to you. What are some of your thoughts on like what inspires teams, what makes people excited to work for, to work for leaders?
A good question. I think so. It is really inspiring for me, and I've always thought of, and this actually goes back to my Nordstrom days. Is they teach you really early on there that people work for people, and I've taken that throughout my career. So I truly believe if I can focus on my people, that they will perform, which means everyone will hit their number. They'll want to work for me. They'll want to work for the company, and maybe they'll follow me to my next company, or I can promote them, and they can forever be a part of my network. And so I think that for me, that's really what inspires me to be a people leader is I truly care, to your point, I care deeply about the squishy human on the other side. And I think that that's a lot of the reason that I've had people that have been successful under me is just because I understand what they're going through. I ask questions in one-on-ones. I always had a point, even if I had 8 reps, I would ask in one-on-ones, what's one thing going on in their life that I could write down, and I would write it down on a sticky note. And in 48 hours or at the end of the week or in the next one-on-one, I would say, hey, I think that you got engaged on Saturday. How'd that go? Like that is powerful. I had someone who had a mom that was ill, just checking in, Slack. Hey, just want to check on your mom. I know it's just Wednesday, just want to check in. Like that stuff goes so far. And so I think like that's a piece of it. And the second piece is I tell my team this all the time, that I believe I work for them. Truly, I believe I'm at the bottom of the hierarchy. Just flip it upside down, and I work for them. And I tell them that, and I'm honest and open about that. So I think just not being afraid to get into their job, like PG with them or get on calls with them. I'm not afraid of any of that. And I think that has led me to have successful relationships with people that I've led.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I always tell folks is like measure and I was talking with the COO of this security company yesterday who's looking for a sales leader, and she wanted some guidance. And we were talking about like recruiting sales leaders and like how you can like know how you can differentiate the ones that like have their shit together versus are like terrible. And it's hard because like we're all sellers, right? So we're like, woo, razzle dazzle, right? Like, and so I think and so I actually have this actually I'll put it in the chat, this skills inventory where one of the things here, I'll drop it in here, is who are the reps and the managers that you would be able, like would come with you. Because if someone can't like answer that, then like it's kind of a red flag, right? And so yeah, and so the thing is that I always tell folks like judge a sales leader by their judge the sales leader by that, judge them by their coaching tree. So like I'll give you an example. Like Atrium doesn't have much of a coaching tree. Sorry, we have a great coaching tree internally at this point. But if you look at some of my former sellers, like the gentleman who runs sales at like Security Pal used to be an AE manager at my last software company. The gentleman who runs mid-market sales at Redis Labs used to be see if they're the people who are under this person have gone on to success in other places, because that's going to be a really good indicator of whether or not like this person has their act together and develops their folks.
Oh, yeah, it's a badge of honor. If you can promote people to where they want to go, right? Figure out, do they want management? Do they want mid-market? It's a badge of honor, in my opinion, to be able to coach and inspire someone and to be successful enough to get promoted.
Yeah, and I think to the point about sales management, sales management is sales, and and like a lot of the things kind of translate over. One of the things that we talk about quite a bit at Atrium is we call it lifetime value of the human, LTVH. It's like I guess it's like LVMH, but it's that's Nordstrom land, but it's LTVH, lifetime value of the human. And so people oftentimes, I guess it's like it's not about like like being a relationship seller. It's more about identifying the people who like get the problem that you solve, right? So like you're a great example of this, right? Like, so probably like 20 or 30% of the people that we work with at Atrium, we're able to identify very quickly, like, oh man, this person gets it. Like they're super bright, they're data driven. They are not like, hostile to the concept of like, metrics, you can't measure me. I'm like a sales artist. It's like, cool, man. It's like the scenes in Moneyball, right? Like we're never going to convince you, right? Like the only way you're going to buy is if like your CRO who's like younger than you and like is okay with math, like tells you that you're going to buy. Great. But when you find those people, it's like you want to hold who are great. You want to hold on to them. Right. And we're starting to see this because like you want to get the deal done with them at their current organization, even if that means like pricing accommodations or whatever. It's just like when you find someone who's got that spark, you're like, oh man. And this is like this is early stage advice, and also like usually when you're in like a disruptive like a new category creation, because there isn't this thing. So you're like, if someone gets it, you're like, oh man, diamond. One. Two, you want to like help them wherever they go and follow them. And we do a really good job of it. And so we actually now get a bunch of inbound from like coaching trees. If you were like, so TripActions is a good example. Unfortunately, TripActions isn't an Atrium customer anymore. But like there's a bunch of TA people who are all over the place who come back inbound. And we see this quite a bit as well. And so like the idea there is like, you just want to help those folks be as successful as possible. And then it's like the same thing with like your staff as well. Like ideally, I always talk about this. Like I tell my team, hey, like we're building a 100-person sales organization. So that means that there's going to be lots of managers with it. We're going to go into different segments, et cetera. If for whatever reason, like, we go sideways, hopefully not, like I'm going to still help you like take the next step of your career in the place where you can do that. Right. Yeah. You had a big change recently where you went from first line into second line leadership. Spicy. What have the biggest changes been there for you?
A lot. I'm still learning. I'm only a quarter in. But it's definitely different. I think the three biggest learnings for me is, so I am really data driven. So you kind of hit on that with Atrium. So looking at a team data driven, right, versus looking at a whole team, like throughout North America, 17 reps, it's quite different, right? So finding the trends, finding out what trends I should be looking at that actually mean something downstream, right? So those are all areas, just me being a data driven leader, that's an area I'm still learning. Another area is inspiring. So I've always inspired my team, and I'm inspiring from farther away. So I'm not used to, someone the other day told me that someone in the room was like afraid of me. And I was like, oh my God, but it was just someone that was younger in their career and they just hadn't met me yet. And everyone was like, it's okay, it's just Emily. But it's an interesting feeling being further away from the folks that are on the front lines, right? So it's just getting engaged and getting involved. I do skip levels across the team to make sure that we avoid that, but it was definitely a different feeling for me, for sure.
Totally. Yeah. I actually do a master class on data-driven sales leadership. So second level leadership. Yeah. Did I do it this week? Did I do it last week? Our marketing team has me doing like 3 events a week. So it all just blends together. But I think the big thing there is like, you can't pay attention to single reps anymore.
Yep.
It's not your job, right? The same way when you go from being a seller to being a sales manager, like you are not responsible for deals anymore. You're responsible for reps, right? Like you can, and like the place where you can deliver impact is by like identifying the shortfall of the rep. Oh, you have pipe hygiene problems as indicated by the fact that like, you have a bajillion untouched opportunities, or, oh, you have an activity problem. What's the deal there? Or like you have a conversion rate problem. like everything dumps out of your pipe right at disco. What's going on there? Then you get up a level and like you can't even be at that level. It's more kind of like what's going on with this, like what's going on with this team. Because this, you probably have 3 managers going into you.
Yep.
17. Yeah. Like what's going on with the teams? Like, sorry, what's going on holistically across all of our teams? So add up those 3 teams, like our forecast, our pipe inflow, or like op inflow, current pipe, forward pipe, all those sort of things. Then unpacking that, am I getting the like, you know, aggregate win rate, aggregate ASP, aggregate deal cycle? Then jumping down to the teams and saying, do any of these teams have issues? Oh, this team over here, and are all 3 the same like type? It's like SMB, 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 or is it like, okay, that's, I mean, better to have like, you know, 3 apples than like orange, watermelon, tomato,
100%.
or like even, yeah. So at least that's like better. Because then you unpack the teams like, oh, this team has a win rate problem. This team has a, you know, an ASP problem or whatever. And then like, there's that. The other thing that can be there can be scenarios where it can make sense to pay attention to reps, but it has to be high criticality situations. And the examples that I like to give for that is like, one, if you're able to help a manager figure out, like help them debug like a problem child, or even an outperformer. We're like, hey, why is this person, like, let's figure out what this person's problem is, right? I'm not helping you babysit all 8. I've got this one sticky wicket, help me with this. And then the other thing is like reps that are in ramp, because like ramp's so important. It's like worth the extra eyes, because it's like, hey, look, once they're out of ramp, like, okay, they're your responsibility, but until they're out of ramp, they're both of our responsibilities, because like we got to get them to success. I think though, like, yeah, that's where this is a big focus area for Atrium, is helping 2nd level leaders and 3rd level leaders use like level appropriate data, so weird phrase, in order to execute their job well. The other thing too, like it's all about like you're doing something from like one layer removed. So you can't like tell the reps, do this thing right here. What you can do now, what you have to do is you have 3 teams, and it's more about like systems. Hey guys, this is how we do one-on-ones. Here's the template.
Right.
As an example, like, hey guys, this is the content of our stand-up meetings. Do this. And so it's like the systematization of that. And so like when you become a 2nd level leader, and this is the case with like 1st level leaders, when you're like an early stage environment, there's nothing, you should be like spending a lot of your time like making documents and templates and like operating rhythms and kind of things like that, versus like doing actual work, if you will, like filling things out. It's more like making systems for other people to be able to fill out. And then I think your point about inspiring, one of the things we were talking about force management earlier, like memes and like mantras, BLT, right?
Yeah.
That was a mantra, right? Like you had created a meme where everyone can like wrap their brain around it. And they're like we do this at Atrium, right? So our sales team mantra is light it up, show them the light, close it down, do it again, because our AEs are so focused on turning on accounts. So we're going to turn on your Atrium account, because as soon as you see what's going on, you're going to see the light. We're going to transact quickly. We're not going to try to go across the entire organization, because we don't have to. And then we're going to get you to success, and then we're going to expand the account. And so like by like, that's a huge bucket of words versus light it up, show them light, close it down, and do it again. And so like those kind of like mantras can be really helpful. Do you guys have other kind of like any other kind of sayings internally at Heap to kind of like help people think, like obviously BLT was Nordstrom, but any sort of things that you guys are focusing on right now, or like, you know, to help people being inspired, or helping them stay between the swim lanes?
We don't have anything catchy, so I'm gonna have to take that offline. I love the idea. Our thing right now is just like back to the basics. So
sorry, that was it. No, that was it. That's it. No, that's it. That's what. Yeah, you were saying that earlier.
Yep. Just, I mean, so much goes into it, right? And so many people overcomplicate a sales process and overcomplicate their job and their operating rhythm. If you actually look at some people's calendars, It's just getting back to the basics. What are the small things that make you successful in your role, and how can you get 1% better at those small things? And not, I mean, our CRO always says this: don't overcomplicate a ham sandwich, and it's true, right?
They said they wanted to buy. Send them the DocuSign.
Right.
Are you sure? Let's talk more about it. Right? It's like the scene in Moneyball, right? Where like Billy Bean is on the phone and he's like, well, what do you think about like, Gutierrez for Wilson? The guy's like, yeah, okay, cool. And he just goes click and he hangs up. And he's like, got the answer I wanted, right? Like, don't overcomplicate it, right? It's funny. The one thing that so now, because I'm managing a bunch of managers right now, the one thing I think that ends up being very helpful, like there's the things that you have to do for you, and then there's the things that you have to invest and tell your managers about, because if they're a first time, oftentimes they're going to be a first time manager in early stage startups, but not necessarily, is like what they should feel comfortable, like, hey, this feels weird right now because you're a first time manager, but that's okay. Like the thing that you're doing that feels weird is actually appropriate. Like as an example, like this is where mantras are really helpful. Repetition. Like repetition. Like all we do is we say, like, you say it again and again and again. You remind people and you remind people and remind people. And then when you're done doing that, you do it again. And like when you think it's too much, it's still not enough. And that's and so like not only do you as a second level leader need to remember that like we have to remind people, and like this is why kind of coming up with things that are catchy, that can be memeable within an organization, can be powerful. It's also telling your managers like, hey, look, that's like your job. It's just like to repeat these things again and again and again and again, and it's going to feel uncomfortable, right? Or similarly, like as a first time manager, like coaching, like as a second level leader, coaching managers on management ends up being something that is really powerful, because you'll get a lot of these first line managers who are first time managers who don't feel comfortable coaching other people, because oftentimes they're coming, like it might even be their colleagues,
their peers. Yep.
Yeah, might be their former peers. Like, and we actually had this recently. It was crazy. We have this SDR who's like, oh my God, she's just like setting the world on fire right now. It's amazing. And the funny thing was, like, she had a slow ramp, but her activity was like bananas, right? Her activity was bananas. Her like all of her quality metrics, except for her op conversion metrics, were good. So her email response rate was great. Her number, like she was like her frequency of like her multi-threading was great. Her frequency of interaction, like the touches per account, was really great. So like all like the behaviors were there, and so it was like, gosh, what's going on here? And even the email response rates were good, which was interesting. So that was indicating to us that she wasn't closing. Like someone would come back with an objection and she wouldn't like go for the kill. And so what ended up, and what was kind of funny was we actually have our SDRs pair with each other. So she's like pretty new. She's like 2 months in or whatever. And she was paired with like an 8-month tenured or like a 7-month tenured person. And so what was weird was we were like, this is weird that like she's getting these levels of responses, but not able to like get them on the calendar. And so because we had prescribed to the SDR, the more senior SDRs, like, hey, you should be looking at your ramping buddies' responses and helping them with these objections. And so like when we went to debug it, right, it turned out that like some of the more senior SDRs were uncomfortable saying like, hey, that's wrong.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. And so as soon as then we're like, right. And so makes sense, right? And so as soon as we were like, hey, like that actually is your job, you need to do this. And then also in this case, the first level manager realized that they need to like pre-handle that objection, if you will. Like, hey, it's gonna feel weird that you're gonna be coaching this person like this, but you gotta do it. As soon as like that actual that prescriptive coaching started happening with this woman, her opportunity creation is just like, it's insane, right? And so I think that, yeah, it's fantastic. And like we actually have a bunch of stories like this because like we use the hell out of Atrium internally, obviously. But it was fascinating to see that like you had a managerial shortfall there that kind of led to that. And I think that's an important thing that we have to remember as leaders, is like we got to tell our managers what is expected, and also the thing that would feel weird to them is actually not weird. Like, yeah, It's supposed to feel that way. Don't worry, it gets better.
Exactly. Yeah. Inspect what you expect.
Yeah, totally. Wonderful. Well, Emily, I told you that this was going to be a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed it. I had a absolutely fantastic time. Next time you're down in San Francisco, please let me know so we can hang out. And everybody, thank you for joining us. We have another fantastic guest coming up next week. We've got Harsh Sabiki from Octopus Deploy. He's formerly of Pendo. He was a sales leader at Pendo, sales leader at Octopus Deploy, sales leader at GitHub. So we're going to have a lot of fun times for that. But Emily, have a great weekend. Okay, enjoy Napa. Okay.
Thank you so much. See ya.
Okay, see ya.
Bye bye.